So, Godzilla, the one to rule them all, the king of the monsters. In 2014, Gareth Edwards, director of this small film called, I don't know, Star Wars: A Rogue One, directed Godzilla, which has now become massively well known because it was the progenitor, the first one in the now known series of the Monsterverse. And this year we've been blessed, 10 years later from this film, with Kong and Godzilla. So, it's a big film with big shoes to fill. Does it live up to our expectations now though, 10 years later? Let's find out. So, Gareth Edwards mentioned the director. He most recently did The Creator, which was a fantastic film done on $80 million. It was a bit of a box office blunder. It only made 20 million back from its 80 million budget, but still fantastic film, and I will watch again, and when I do I'll put a review out on here. So I mentioned the director Gareth Edwards. Now before he got to Godzilla, he directed a much smaller, lesser known film called Monsters in 2010. Now he directed this film on a really small budget of under $500,000. It had two actors, him, who's behind the camera, and a van, and that was it. They went to 5 different countries to film, and he says in an interview that what he did was he shot the film, and he didn't have a screenplay, and he didn't have storyboards. He just kind of had like paragraphs of things, of story that he wanted to hit. Now he didn't have any extras, so what he used to do was actually get people on site who was just there in the surroundings and get them to act in the film, get consent. Can you act? Can you say these lines? Brilliant, they're in the film. And I love how innovative that is. And he did all the visual effects himself. All himself, in his bedroom, like I am right now, all by himself. And if you watch that film, which I highly encourage you to watch that film either or before you watch Godzilla, because I think it's great context, you will be blown away at what he's done. He was using After Effects and, you know, Maya and 3D software. You could do the stuff he does in Blender, which is free, right? And you see it and you're like, wow, like it still probably holds up today. Now, something that he did in that film, which was really key to understanding Godzilla, is that he held back and he refrained from showing the monster till the very end of the film. And I think that was probably because of as a constraint, because it was really just him working on it, him, 2 people acting, and a van, and that's it. And it made millions back. It won a lot of awards as well. And I think that's because of the innovative nature of the production side of the film. And it blows me away, really, thinking about it. Now, fast forward 4 years later, and he lands Godzilla, going from a budget of $500,000 to $160 million. Like, it's insane. Can you imagine being in that position where you get offered one of the most iconic monsters in the cinema history? You've got sets at your disposal, you've got hundreds of extras, you can close down streets, you can use green screen, sound staging, an army of VFX artists. He's got all that at his disposal, but as the scale increases, so does the risk. And massive props to the studios actually go into him, because I think it was a fantastic choice to see, seeing what he could do with such a small budget. Well, if you can do that on that budget, what can he do with a big budget? And so we have Godzilla. It's now 10 years later. How does it hold up? I remember seeing Godzilla when it came out, and I was actually really impressed with the film. I did think it had faults, which I will go into, but having seen it recently, with the context of now that was actually the first in the Monsterverse series, I think it puts a bit more importance on the film. Kong and Godzilla has just come out and it smashed the box office. So people really like monster films. Now, if you look at the comments of some of the YouTube videos for the trailer, and the trailer's fantastic as well, because it does what it does well in the film, which is builds up hype, tension, mystique, doesn't reveal the monster, a bit like Jaws, which is, he said he learnt from Steven Spielberg, and he applied that methodology of don't show the creature till you have to. But most notably, the comments under the trailer for Godzilla say, this shit's like a completely different film compared to the other Godzilla films and the Kong films, because the tone of those subsequent films, certainly the ones with Kong and Godzilla, is so much more zany, very comic booky, quite light. It doesn't have this grittiness, dark tone, even the visuals, darkness to it that this film has. And some people would have liked that at the time, and some people didn't like that, because I feel like you're in a bit of a catch-22 with these films, because some people just want to watch the big lizard punch the big monkey, and it's simple as that, right? And I can do that too. But this film doesn't do that. It has a lot of restraint. The plot is quite simple. Godzilla destroys a city of some sort. That's all you really need to know going into this film. Now, I am going to cover some plot points that might be spoiler territory, but you've had 10 years to watch the film, so it's on you. And if you want to go watch the film, go watch the film and then come back to this review. At the start of the film, you have Bryan Cranston and you have Bryan Cranston's wife. They're living in Japan and they've got this young son. They both work at a power plant. Bryan Cranston is concerned that there's these earthquake-like tremors and it may pose a threat to the power plant. Obviously, this is a nod, a nuclear power plant, to the original theme and ideas of nuclear scare and nuclear war and nukes, which come from the Japanese original film, right? So there's this kind of thematic crossover there, which is very nice, and it's done very well because it's serious at the start. It's very, very serious. Bryan Cranston is really concerned with what's going on. His colleagues think that it's an earthquake, but he's sure it's not an earthquake. It's something entirely different because earthquakes are erratic, and he's looking at the seismic charts and they repeat and they're almost identical, so he's worried. So anyway, you see him and you follow him go to work with his wife. He gets there and his wife's going down into the deep organs of the power plant, and then something goes wrong because the earth starts shaking, things start moving, things start cracking, alarms start going off, everything's going haywire, things are going seriously wrong. Bryan Cranston says, shut it down, shut it down. People hesitate, but by the time he shut it down, it's almost too late. The power plant is literally crumbling and his wife is deep in the power plant. Radiation is leaking out and he's got to get his wife out. And there's this fantastic sequence where he's on the radio to his wife and he's running down the power plant corridors and everyone's running the opposite way and his wife is trying to get out with the people there. And as the plant's crumbling, something knocks her wife down, she falls on the floor and she's trying to get up her colleague who's struggling. Cranston's at this big metallic door thing and he's got to press the button and it'll close it. All his colleagues are saying, shut the door, and he's screaming, saying his wife's in there, he's not going to shut the door until he has to. And he's asking his wife to come on and she says, leave me, I'm not going to make it. And he's crying, and then he sees this massive irradiated smoke billowing his way, and it's a fantastic shot. I'm getting goosebumps actually. And he screams there, like watching with horror as this thing's coming. He smacks the button and it closes and he's just sobbing. And then his wife comes to this little porthole thing and she's there and she takes off her mask and he's bawling his eyes out and she puts her hand up and he does, and then the doors close and she's gone. And I'm actually getting a bit emotional talking about it, and it's fucking Godzilla. It's stupid, but that's just props to Bryan Cranston because he's the fucking heart of this film. He's so good. It's the heart and soul of it. Which, spoiler, and this is a big spoiler, this is the big one, it proper sucks when he dies like 25 minutes later. So, it fast forwards 15 years later, Bryan Cranston is there and he's estranged from his son, which he had with his wife, who you do see earlier in the film, who's now portrayed by Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who's now an explosive diffusion guy for the army in America. As I said, they're estranged, son and father, and they come back into each other's lives and there's some tension there. And this is kind of starting where you get introduced to a kaiju, and you assume as an audience member that, it's going to be Godzilla. No, it's actually not Godzilla, it's going to be the antagonist that you start to meet. And there's some other plot points that, surprises that I won't tell you, because otherwise you're just going to be watching the action. But it goes from there. And this is actually where my main gripe with the film is. Some people are going to love this film and because they want the darker side, they want the human aspect of the story. And then there'll be other people that won't like the film because they want the opposite. They just want big monkey, big lizard, fight, right? And the sad thing is because Bryan Cranston's the heart of it and he passes away, what you're left with is Aaron Taylor-Johnson's character, who's kind of just a witness, a vehicle for the story for you to follow along. And they don't do really anything to give this guy emotion. Now, I know he's like an army dude, but Jesus Christ, he's lost his dad, he's lost his mum. These creatures have been a hand in the demise of both of his parents, and you don't even see him cry. There is no emotion whatsoever, and it's just such a shame. It's just squandered opportunity to kind of you know, bring this story into like a really kind of emotive. You could have even made it like about revenge, really. And I think that's why Godzilla Minus One worked, because the human aspect of Godzilla Minus One really made that film sing. And this just doesn't have it when Aaron Taylor-Johnson is in the driving seat of the film. So you've got that. So that's why I'm somewhat, you know, I can see the potential of the film, and I'm a bit disappointed in it, because it would have been just so much better if he actually had some bloody lines that he could, you know, emote to an actor, because Aaron Taylor-Johnson has hardly anything to fucking say. He's Mr. Action Man, and he doesn't do anything, he doesn't emote, right? So that's a shame. But also, you're not going to please the other fans who are the monster fans, because only the last 15 minutes of the film, bearing in mind it's 2 hours long, this film, is actually fighting between the monsters and Godzilla. So you're in a bit of a catch-22, which is why I think it got the mixed reviews that it did. But putting that all to the side with the spoilers and my disappointment and whatever, other than that, this is actually a really, really well-made film. Because from a production side, they nailed who they got directing this film, and they nailed who they got to be the cinematographer. And I've talked about Gareth Edwards, you know, he's fantastic when it comes to VFX. His knowledge of VFX in each of his films, from Monsters to Godzilla to Star Wars Rogue One and The Creator, his innate understanding and intuitive understanding and the detail and expertise in directing, you know, these massive scale productions in a very smart way that saves money for the studio, but also makes things look fantastic. No one can level at his films that they look bad, because they look all fantastic, and Godzilla looks immense. For example, he says about he uses rotoscoping a lot because it doesn't have the same kind of fuzziness that you get with like green screen environments. Now, bearing in mind, this is also before The Mandalorian, which pioneered the use of this wraparound, massive 360-degree kind of sound studio with this plasma screen that enveloped everything, kind of like the sphere that you find in Las Vegas, right? Just not as big, which they used on Mandalorian and other TV shows. They didn't have that then, so you were kind of dealing with green screen and other objects. And by watching that behind the scenes, you see that they've got stuff on set. They're creating sets and the destruction and the detritus, but then they've got a green screen in the background. You see Edwards directing people, because he knows in his own head how it looks, but Aaron Taylor-Johnson doesn't. Bryan Cranston doesn't. Elizabeth Olsen, who plays Aaron Taylor-Johnson's girlfriend in this, who's great, by the way, she emotes, she cries. They all have to listen to him and what his vision is, and you can see him going, right, it's at 12 o'clock now, it's moving to 9 o'clock, just lower, you need to lower your voices, and you lean back, okay, now it's raising up the monster, you got to look up for it, but you hold your breath. It's fantastic, right? It's amazing to see that. They don't have this bullshit ping-pong ball thing on the end of a stick, because this creature's 300 foot tall, and that was a challenge for the actors. So he's great as a director, fantastic. And I mentioned the cinematographer because they go hand in hand, the direction of the cinematography and what makes this film sing, because, as I said, yeah, the heart of it's not there, and you know, you're not going to get full-blown action that you expect in the other films. But if you can revel and enjoy in the kind of thrilling aspect and the suspense that this film generates in holding back you seeing Godzilla, then you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of the film, because several times through watching this film on first and second and third watch, I got goosebumps. So Seamus McGurney's the cinematographer for Godzilla. Now, he's a 2-time Oscar winner that won for Atonement and Anna Karenina, which, you know, whilst Atonement has a kind of a war drama, so there is, you know, there is big set pieces and big sets and things like that, so he's used to directing something on a larger scale. You know, those two films are kind of like, from what I understand, a romance story. There's a bit more of a personal, one-to-one story going on a smaller scale, though it is on this larger backdrop contextually. But this film's big context, you know, it's a massive scale, you know, cities being destroyed, and he just nails it, because through Gareth Edwards' understanding of VFX and McGurney's understanding of the camera, it blends really well together. Now, it's a very dark film, which a lot of critics go, oh, it's all dark, I can't see, but it works for the grittiness and tone of the film. You've got these great camera movements in which there's a great sequence where what they do as a motif is that the idea of media and news, the TV channels, as the information is being disseminated, because this has never happened before, people don't know that these monsters are coming, so you see it on the news channels, and the first time you actually see Godzilla does this amazing roar, and it's in Hawaii, and it's actually the first day of filming, and this creature, the villain creature, comes along, and it destroys this pedestrian plane that you take to go on holiday, and it destroys it, and parts of it flings over, and it cartwheels into another part of the plane, and it blows up, and then it passes on another bit, and it blows up another one, and you've got all these people in the airport, because the camera's all the way back here, and you've got these people in the airport, and you can see them all reacting and move to it as the fire and flames burst outside, and then you see this foot come into frame, and the music swells, and it's this like orchestral choir and it all rises up really slowly, and it's amazing, and this foot comes in, it's Godzilla, and it plonks down, and everyone goes silent, and the whole tone, and it comes down, and then the camera pans up from the ground, and it's Godzilla, and he roars, and it's amazing, and it's so good, and then he cuts away from it, and you're just so like almost pissed off. You're like, oh my god, I thought they were going to fight. And he says it's one of his favourite sequences in the film, that just as you see Godzilla, they pull away from it as a bit of a fucking, visual cock tease, right? And then it cuts to the news, and it's bloody Aaron Taylor-Johnson's son watching the news, and he goes, oh, Mummy, dinosaur! And then Elizabeth Olsen looks and shits herself, right, because they realise then it's all gone bad. So hopefully that illustrates to you kind of the refrain that this film has in showing you the creatures. And what I love about it, which Pacific Rim did really well as well, Guillermo del Toro film, one of my favourite films, because I do like monster films, can you tell, is that they always shoot from a human perspective. And this is something that the latter films later on don't do, is that, all the camera angles is feasibly where a human could get. It's either a helicopter shot, it's on the top of a building, it's on the ground, it's underneath, it's in tunnels somewhere, it's behind doors, whatever, but it's always from a human perspective, and usually you'll have something within the frame to give you context for the scale of how big these creatures are. The buildings, doors, vehicles, planes, whatever it is. So that's really good, and it works really well, and it's something the later films I've just completely fucked up his name. His actual name is Seamus McGarvey, not McGurney. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is the sequences are fantastic in this film. Godzilla looks great, the visual effects are fantastic. Another bit that I'll talk about, another sequence that I absolutely love because it's just brilliant, and I know I'm spoiling it, but I have to talk about it, is there's this bit where it's kind of coming up to the final fight, and the creatures are all kind of coming down on California. That's where they're all converging. Godzilla's on his way there, and he's going underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and it looks amazing, and it's this very overcast day, and mist is rolling in, and the other creatures coming along as well. Now there's actually these other creature, or other creatures should I say, without spoiling it, has an EMP power, so it charges up and it can like punch its foot down, and then it sends an EMP blast that turns off all electrical equipment around. And this refrain that happens in the film, there's also another motif in the delayed reaction of these massive colossal things coming at you. So when this happens, there's this shot where the camera is on a massive halo carrier in the middle of the sea, and you can see the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and there's all these army personnel that you know, imagine like Top Gun, one of those ships you find on Top Gun, right? And you're on there, and it goes all quiet. An EMP blast has just gone off, so everyone's really quiet, no one can turn off, the ship's stopped, and there's this silence, and then you hear this low whistling, and it's a jet plane falling from the sky, and it splashes in the water. Then there's another one that comes spinning, literally like a frisbee, from the background into the midground, and it comes spinning and splashes into the water. Then another one drops down much closer, and you see a guy pop out his chute, the parachute comes out of the ejection bit, and that is just amazing. And then it scales it up even further. Then they all look up because this jet has just splashed in the water in front of them, nearly killed them, destroyed the halo carrier, and they look up, and the camera pans up, and then the clouds and the heavens part because this creature comes down that's flying, and like the water goes everywhere, and it's amazing. And the scale and kind of godlike nature of these creatures are really, really captured in sequences like this. So when the film is good, it's good. Like, it really does put the god in Godzilla, which the other films later on don't. It's a bit more comic book, whatever. But this film nails that. So as I mentioned at the start, this is obviously Godzilla, and Godzilla was a very old franchise, and it was basically a film, a warning about nuclear warheads and nuclear power, and he is a creature as a consequence of mankind's hubris in terms of using nuclear power. This kind of metaphor is then extended in terms of a kind of like environmentalism and man's hubris and thinks that he can own the planet and the world. So, you know, that meta-narrative or that idea is kind of brought on a little bit, and it's mainly spoken through Ken Watanabe's character, Dr. Ishiro Serizawa, and their assistant, Sally Hawkins, it's got Vivian Graham. And throughout the film, he's telling, like, the army personnel not to fight Godzilla and just, look, we're not going to win. Let Godzilla do his thing and kill these creatures. He is what will restore balance to the world. And fair enough to the army commander's defence, he's like, no, because I can't just sit here and do nothing and hope that this monster kills the other monsters. That's a load of bullshit. But alas, that's what happens, and that's the final fight. And I won't spoil anything about the final fight because it is phenomenal, and you actually see kind of a motif that spans across multiple films, in that Godzilla, there's a transformation about him, which I won't spoil. And this kind of meta-narrative is present in the film, you know. He is the leveler, he is, you know, it sets up this idea which they kind of progress throughout the films, is that he's the alpha. And I do like the idea that Godzilla is this creature that he doesn't really care about humanity, really. He just wants to beat the other massive creatures, and, you know, humans are in the way as a consequence, so that's that. And I like that because it is about the hubris and the smallness of man. And this film does a really good job of kind of making you feel that. Really, I'm just fanboying about the production side of the film. Now, I totally understand if monster films aren't your thing, this film isn't going to win you over. It's clear and simple as that. If you're not into monster films or kaiju films, you ain't going to like it. If you want a kaiju film like the old school one, where they're getting rubber suits and they punch each other and it's lots of action, this isn't that film either. And as I said, it's a difficult one because it doesn't completely nail the human characters, which has been a problem since. You know, the human characters are witnesses, but they never fully develop characters enough that you actually care enough, other than Bryan Cranston, as I mentioned earlier, if they die or not. Which is something that Godzilla Minus One, did exceptionally well. But the American ones, the Legendary Picture ones, have yet to do that. But the closest that they ever did it, in my opinion, is Godzilla 2014. And it's a damn shame that he didn't direct the second one, because the tone it completely changed after that. King of the Monsters is just not... It is, as I said earlier, it's not... It feels like it's not from the same franchise. But, saying that, it did start the franchise, and I very much like these series of films. So, what more can I say? I really, really, really like Godzilla, as you can probably tell. I've talked on camera about this for ages now. It's probably going to be like a 20-minute video. Because I really like Gareth Edwards. I think what Seamus McGarvey did with the cinematography was fantastic. The blending of these different techniques, rotoscoping, green screen, whatever, and the cinematography, the use of extras, it just looks fantastic. It's just these key things of where's the heart of the film? Oh, it died with Bryan Cranston. And where's the creatures? I want to see more fighting. Oh, it's only happened 15 minutes at the end of the film. These are big hurdles for people to get into, because you're not pleasing, really. I'm saying there's two camps, there's other people as well that will like these films for different reasons. You're not going to really appease these two groups, right? You've not hit the human side, and you've not given us lots of action. So I think that's where this film trips up. So it's not perfect by any means, but if it weren't for this film, we wouldn't have these series of films now. So if you do like the Monsterverse films, because critics are panning, really, not really vibing with the new films, but the people really love it. So, you know, you've got this film to kind of thank for it. And he's only gone and done amazing things since then, Gareth Edwards. So if he ever does return to Legendary Monsterverse, I am going to be really, really happy. And I hope, you know, one day that there is this serious tone that we've got in Godzilla, and we actually do really nail, like Godzilla Minus One does, these human characters. Because if we do get that, then Legendary is going to have a seminal piece of monster kaiju cinema on the hands. But until then, we've got Godzilla 2014.